Her voice was a comfort to millions, a perfect, melodic, and almost impossibly sad sound that defined an entire era. We know the songs by heart. We can hum the melodies of Close to You, and we've only just begun without a second thought. And for decades, we've known the tragic end of her story. Or at least, we thought we did. For more than 40 years, the narrative of Karen Carpenter has been one of a beautiful voice, silenced too soon by a terrible, misunderstood illness. It's a story of public success and private pain, of a wholesome image that masked a devastating internal struggle. But what if the most heartbreaking parts of her story weren't just about her illness, but about the life she was desperately trying to live? What if the truth, when you piece it all together, is even more tragic than we ever imagined? By reading the well-documented facts of her life, the interviews, the biographies, the accounts from those who knew her best, the darker story emerges. It's a story that isn't about one single tragedy, but a relentless series of them. It's not just a story of an illness, it's a story of a voice deliberately silenced and a spirit systematically crushed by the people and the industry that were supposed to support her. This isn't just about how Karen Carpenter died. This is the story of how she was prevented from truly living, and when you see all the pieces laid out, it changes everything. To understand the weight of Karen's struggle, we have to go back to the image the world fell in love with. The Carpenters weren't just a band, they were a phenomenon. In the early 1970s, as the world was reeling from the turbulent 60s, Richard and Karen Carpenter were a symbol of reassuring normalcy. Their music was a soothing balm, crafted and harmonically complex, yet effortlessly simple to the ear, and at the center of it all was Karen. At first, she was tucked away behind a drum kit, a position she loved and excelled at. She was a powerhouse drummer with a passion for the instrument that started in high school. But the industry wanted a front woman. They saw the girl with the kind eyes and pushed her to the forefront. When she stepped up to the microphone, what came out was a voice that seemed to stop time. Her contralto was rich, deep, and impossibly smooth, with a melancholy that could break your heart. It was a once-in-a-generation instrument, and it made the Carpenters superstars. They sold millions of records, won 3 Grammy Awards, and created hits that are now woven into the fabric of popular culture. They were America's sweethearts. Richard, the quiet genius arranger, and Karen, the wholesome girl next door, with the voice of an angel. Their public image was pristine. They were presented as a squeaky clean family act, living with their parents well into their 20s, a stark contrast to the psychedelic chaos of the era. This was the official story, carefully curated for public consumption. But behind closed doors, the pressure to maintain that perfection was becoming unbearable, and the first cracks were beginning to show. The trouble started subtly. A single comment in a review called her chubby. For Karen, it was a spark in a room filled with gasoline. The desire for control, in a life that was increasingly not her own, began to manifest on her dinner plate. She started with a water diet, and her weight dropped from a healthy 145 pounds to around 120. At first, the praise was intoxicating. Friends, family, and the industry lauded her new, slimmer figure. But then, it spiraled. By 1975, her weight had plummeted to a shocking 91 pounds. The praise turned to panicked whispers. The band was forced to cancel a European tour because Karen was so physically exhausted, sometimes sleeping up to 16 hours a day. On stage, audiences gasped at her increasingly frail frame. A review in Variety noted, "She is terribly thin, almost a wraith." This is where the tragedy deepens. In the 1970s, the world had no name for what was happening to her. Anorexia nervosa was a term known only in obscure medical literature. Those around her, acting out of love but with a profound lack of understanding, did what seemed logical. They tried to get her to eat. They didn't realize they were fighting a complex psychological illness about power, control, and a deeply distorted self-image. The early treatments were tragically primitive. Karen was trapped in a nightmare, and the medical world had no map to lead her out. She was fighting a war that no one knew how to win. And this was only the beginning. The greatest battles for her own identity were yet to come. One of the most painful themes that emerges from biographical accounts is the suffocating nature of her family life. The Carpenters' wholesome image was just thought an image. The reality, particularly in her relationship with her mother, Agnes Carpenter, was far more damaging for Karen. From the beginning, there was a clear dynamic in the Carpenter household. Richard was the prodigy. While his talents were celebrated, Karen's were often an afterthought. She was the tomboy who loved drums, a passion that didn't fit her mother's traditional view of a daughter. This feeling of being second best created a deep well of insecurity. She was a global superstar, yet she was still desperately seeking her mother's unequivocal approval. A chilling story from her time in therapy with eating disorder specialist Stephen Levenkrin illustrates this. During a family session, Levenkrin reportedly asked Agnes to simply tell Karen that she loved her. Agnes allegedly deflected and couldn't bring herself to say the words, leaving Karen devastated. This environment of emotional withholding extended to every aspect of Karen's life. She was a multimillionaire superstar in her 20s and 30s, yet her autonomy was consistently negated. Decisions about her career, her finances, and her personal life were heavily influenced by her family. This grinding lack of agency would lead her to make a desperate bid for independence through a project that would become another source of profound pain. Her solo album, in 1979. Richard, battling an addiction to prescription medication, took a year off. For Karen, this was an opportunity. For years, she had been the voice of the Carpenters. Now, she had the chance to be just Karen. She decided to record a solo album. This wasn't an act of rebellion, but one of self-discovery. She moved to New York and teamed up with legendary producer Phil Ramone, who had worked with giants like Billy Joel. The result was a sophisticated, disco-tinged, and lyrically mature record. It was the sound of a woman, not a girl. It was confident, and it was entirely her own. She poured $400,000 of her own money into the project and believed in it fiercely. The reaction from the power brokers in her life was brutal. The top brass at her label, A&M Records, and her brother Richard were lukewarm at best. During a playback session, they met her passion with a wall of disapproval. According to Ramone, Karen broke down and cried, while she was pressured to shelve the project. She never stopped believing in it. In a phone call to Ramone just days before her death, she reportedly said, "I still love our G record." But her bid for artistic independence was shut down. It reinforced the narrative that had haunted her, that she wasn't good enough on her own. Crushed by the rejection, she made another decision she hoped would bring her happiness, one that would prove even more catastrophic. She got married. In her fragile state, Karen met Tom Burris, a real estate developer, 9 years her senior. The relationship was a whirlwind. After just 2 months, they were married in a lavish ceremony in August 1980. From the start, there were red flags. Friends found Burris arrogant and opportunistic. It quickly became apparent that Karen was footing the bill for his lavish lifestyle. But the financial strain was nothing compared to the emotional cruelty. The most devastating blow came just days before the wedding. Burris, who knew Karen desperately wanted children, confessed he'd had a vasectomy. Heartbroken, she wanted to call off the wedding. She pleaded with her mother, but Agnes allegedly refused, citing the money already spent and the invitations sent. Trapped, Karen went through with it. The marriage was a disaster that lasted only 14 months. Accounts from friends allege Burris was emotionally abusive, reportedly calling her a bag of bones and belittling her for her illness. The dream of a loving family had turned into a private hell. The abuse and betrayal intensified her struggle. With her eating disorder, she filed for divorce in late 1982. She was on the verge of finally ending the cruelest chapter of her life, but she would never get that chance. In her final year, Karen seemed to be turning a corner. She spent much of 1982 in New York under the care of therapist Stephen Levincran and gained some weight. She returned to California in late 1982, hopeful about the future. But this optimism masked a deadly secret. While therapy addressed the psychological roots of her illness, the physical damage was far more extensive than anyone knew. Unbeknownst to her doctors and family, Karen had been secretly using ipecac syrup, an over-the-counter medicine used to induce vomiting. What Karen didn't know was that a key ingredient, emmetine, is a cardiotoxin. With repeated use, it doesn't just empty the stomach. It systematically poisons and weakens the heart muscle. On the morning of February 4, 1983, at her parents' home in Downey, her mother found her unconscious. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, but it was too late. Karen Carpenter was pronounced dead at 9:51 a.m. She was 32 years old. The world was stunned. The coroner's report clarified the awful truth. The official cause of death was emmetine cardiotoxicity due to or as a consequence of anorexia nervosa. In simple terms, her heart had failed. Poisoned by the ipecac she used in her desperate, secret struggle. The years of starvation had already weakened her body, and the ipecac was the final, fatal blow. Karen Carpenter's death was a shockwave that changed the public conversation. She was the first major celebrity to die from complications of anorexia, and her story ripped the topic out of the shadows and into the light. Her tragedy became a catalyst for awareness that has undoubtedly saved countless lives. But when we look closer, we see a deeper, more personal tragedy. We don't just see a victim of an illness. We see a woman fighting for agency. We see the defiant artist who poured her soul into a solo album, only to have it rejected. We see the hopeful romantic who longed for a family, only to be met with betrayal. And we hear the daughter who, above all, just wanted to be loved for who she was. The tragedy of Karen Carpenter isn't just that she was sick, it's that her illness was a symptom of a much larger struggle against control by her family, by the industry, and finally, the devastating control she sought over her own body when she felt she had control over nothing else. For decades, we have mourned the loss of her voice. But now, we must also mourn the silencing of her spirit. We must remember her, not just as a tragic figure, but as a brilliant and strong woman who fought to be seen, to be heard, and to be free.